Wanda Davis says, "Sir, I think something is wrong with your glass.
Bryce Holloway stopped mid-laugh. He turned, scanned her top to bottom.
Wanda Holloway, who let this filthy creature near my table? Look at you reek. You're ignorant. You're dirt poor. And you dare open your mouth near people like us.
He stepped forward. You're nothing.
Get out before I have security drag you out like the garbage you are."
A woman lifted her phone, filming. Men at the next table snickered. A waiter looked at the floor. 400 guests, not one voice. Wanda stood still, but none of them could have imagined what was coming. Very soon, every soul in this room would be desperate for the one person they just threw away. 2 hours earlier, the Holloway Grand Hotel ballroom was already a kingdom with no room for someone like Wanda Davis. Crystal chandeliers hung from gold leaf ceilings like frozen constellations. A 16-piece orchestra played Debussy beneath ivory-draped windows. 400 guests moved through the space in tuxedos and couture gowns, their laughter blending with the clink of Waterford crystal. The air carried Dom Perignon, truffle oil, and perfume that cost more per ounce than Wanda earned in a week. Ice sculptures shaped like the Holloway corporate crest towered over tables draped in Italian linen. This was the annual Holloway Foundation Charity Gala, a cathedral of wealth, where Manhattan's elite came to remind each other they owned the world. Behind the swinging kitchen door, fluorescent lights, industrial soap, gray concrete. That was where Wanda belonged. At least, that was what they told her. Wanda Davis, 52, had worked at the Holloway Grand for 6 years. She arrived at 4 every afternoon and left past midnight. She mopped, scrubbed, emptied bins overflowing with napkins stained by champagne and lipstick. She moved through the hotel like a shadow, quiet, efficient, invisible. Her hands were cracked from chemicals. Her back ached from years of bending. Her gray uniform carried her first name in white stitching, just Wanda. No last name. Last names were for people who mattered. But if anyone had truly looked, they would have noticed things that didn't fit. The way her eyes tracked conversations with clinical precision. The way she read discarded newspapers from the science section, lips moving silently over chemical nomenclature. Around her neck, hidden beneath her collar, hung a thin silver chain with a pendant so small it could pass for nothing. A miniature Erlenmeyer flask. 18 years she had worn it. No one had ever asked. No one had ever cared. In her locker, behind a spare uniform, sat a worn paperback. Advanced Organometallic Toxicology, 3rd edition. The spine cracked in dozens of places, margins filled with precise handwritten notes. A name was inscribed inside the front cover, but the locker stayed locked, and nobody ever looked. Tonight, Wanda had been assigned backstage, kitchen corridors, loading dock, staff bathrooms. Invisible. But a staffing shortage forced the floor manager to push her onto the ballroom floor. "Stay along the walls," he said. "No eye contact, don't speak unless spoken to, and don't go anywhere near the VIP tables." The VIP section, where Edmund Holloway sat. Edmund, 64, was the reason this empire existed. Son of a Pittsburgh steelworker, he had built Holloway Industries from a single plant into a global conglomerate. Unlike the inherited wealth surrounding him, Edmund's fortune came from calloused hands and 16-hour days. He still carried that gravity, quiet, watchful, the kind of man who nodded at waitstaff and remembered doormen by name. Earlier tonight, when Wanda passed his table, he looked up and nodded. She nodded back. A small human exchange that no one else noticed. His son was a different species. Bryce Holloway, 28, had never built anything. He inherited the name, the money, the arrogance. He ran the foundation not because he earned it, but because Edmund hoped responsibility might mature him. It hadn't. Bryce wore Brioni and Patek Philippe. He greeted senators by first name and dismissed waiters with 2 fingers. To Bryce, service staff were furniture. A black woman in a gray uniform was the lowest furniture of all. 2 seats from Edmund sat the evening's honored guest, Doctor, Gregory Ashton, 59, silver-haired, decorated with honorary pins from 3 institutions. The program called him recipient of the Whitfield Prize in Toxicology for pioneering work in organometallic compound classification. He smiled for the cameras. He shook hands with senators. He basked in applause that belonged to someone else. When Wanda passed his chair to clear a bread plate, her hand trembled. Once. Barely. She did not look at him, but her jaw locked, and her heart slammed against the glass flask beneath her collar. She knew who Gregory Ashton was. She knew what he had stolen. The prize on his chest was built on her research, her data, her years. A lie that had cost Wanda everything she ever was. But tonight was not about the past. Something was happening at this table right now that no one else could see. What Wanda would discover in the next hour would change Edmund Holloway's fate and resurrect a name the world had tried to bury. Wanda kept her head down and worked the edges of the ballroom, staying close to the walls the way she had been told. She wiped spills no one thanked her for. She emptied trash bins while guests laughed 3 feet away without acknowledging she existed. She was furniture. She was air. And she had learned over 6 long years that being invisible was safer than being seen. But the VIP section pulled at her like gravity. She couldn't stop thinking about Edmund Holloway's hand, the way his fingernails carried that faint bluish tint when he lifted his champagne flute. She had noticed it the first time she passed his table, a whisper of discoloration that most people would dismiss as a trick of the chandelier light. But Wanda's mind didn't work like most people's. It was cataloged. It is cross-referenced. It was memorable. She found a reason to move closer, a napkin on the floor near the head table. She knelt to pick it up, and as she did, she inhaled. There it was again, faint, bitter, almond, drifting from the half-empty champagne glass at Edmund's right hand. The scent was so subtle that no one sipping wine or eating filet mignon would catch it. But Wanda caught it the way a musician catches a single wrong note in a symphony. She looked at Edmund. His face was flushed. Not the flush of celebration, but something deeper, something chemical. He had loosened his collar. His speech had slowed, words slightly thick, and the guests around him attributed it to drink. But Wanda saw his fingers. The bluish tinge in his nail beds was darker now, spreading. Peripheral cyanosis. Early stage, progressive. Her stomach turned cold. She knew this pattern. She had studied it for 3 years of her life, written 40 pages about it, and documented every stage from the first symptom to cardiac arrest. She knew it the way she knew her own name, the name the world had erased. She had to tell someone. Wanda approached Dr. Caroline Foster, the on-site physician stationed near the bar. Foster was reviewing her phone, relaxed, confident that tonight's biggest medical emergency would be a twisted ankle on the dance floor. Wanda spoke carefully, respectfully, the way she had learned to speak to people who held power over her. "Doctor, I'm sorry to bother you. I've noticed the gentleman at the head table, Mr. Holloway. His nail beds are showing cyanotic discoloration, and there's an unusual odor from his glass. I think he may need medical attention." Foster looked up. Her eyes moved from Wanda's face to the gray uniform, the stitched name tag, the mop cart parked 6 feet behind her. The doctor's expression shifted, not to concern, but to something between amusement and irritation. "I appreciate your concern," Foster said, her tone polished and dismissive. "But Mr. Holloway's health is being monitored by a medical professional. That would be me." She paused. "You're the cleaning staff, correct? I don't think I need a janitor diagnosing my patients. Please go back to your duties." Wanda opened her mouth to explain. The compound profile, the symptom timeline, the smell. But Foster had already turned away, returning to her phone as though the conversation had never happened. Wanda stood there for 3 seconds. 3 seconds of swallowing 18 years of silence. She turned back toward the ballroom and walked directly into Bryce Holloway. He had seen the exchange. He had seen the janitor speaking to the doctor near the VIP section, and his irritation from earlier had calcified into something uglier. "You again!" His voice was loud, intentionally loud, heads turned. "I told you to stay away from this section. What part of that was too complicated for you to understand?" He looked at the guests and gestured at Wanda with an open palm, as though presenting evidence of contamination. "This is what happens when you hire these people. You give them a mop and they think they belong at the table." The phrase, "these people," hung in the air like smoke. A man in a silk tie chuckled. A woman whispered behind a manicured hand. At the far end of the table, a young guest held his phone at waist height, recording. No one said stop. No one said that's enough. Bryce stepped closer. "Let me make this simple enough for even you. You are a janitor. You clean toilets. You are not a doctor. You are not a guest. You are nothing in this room. You exist here because someone has to scrub what we leave behind. So take your cart, take your smell, and disappear. Or I will have you fired, blacklisted, and thrown out the service entrance like the rest of the trash." Every word was a brick, and every person watching added mortar by saying nothing. Dr. Ashton sat 6 feet away, watching the entire scene with a faint, curious expression, the way a man studies something he almost recognizes but cannot quite place. Then he looked away, uninterested, and returned to his conversation. He had looked directly at the woman whose life he destroyed, and he did not remember her. Wanda's hand moved to the pendant beneath her collar, the tiny Erlenmeyer flask, cool against her skin. She held it for 2 heartbeats. Her eyes were dry. Her face showed nothing. But inside, 18 years of injustice pressed against her ribs like a scream she had never been allowed to release. She picked up her mop. She turned away. She walked back toward the kitchen door. And behind her, Edmund Holloway rubbed his numb fingers together, frowned at the strange tingling in his lips, and reached for his champagne glass one more time. Because right now, behind that kitchen door, Wanda Davis was making a decision. And what she chose to do next would prove that the most dangerous thing in the world is not ignorance. It is the arrogance of those who believe they already know everything about everyone. The kitchen door swung shut behind her, and the orchestra vanished, replaced by the clatter of dishes and the hiss of industrial dishwashers. Wanda leaned against the concrete wall. Her pulse was steady. Her mind was not. Every instinct she had buried for 18 years was clawing its way to the surface. She closed her eyes and let the data run. Flushed complexion. Check. Peripheral cyanosis in the nail beds. Check. Bitter almond odor on the glassware. Check. Slurred speech attributed to alcohol. Check. Numbness in the extremities. He had been rubbing his fingers all night. Every symptom aligned. Every marker pointed to the same conclusion. A conclusion she had written about in a paper that now bore someone else's name. Compound 31B, delayed organocyanide toxicity. Wanda opened her locker. She pulled out the worn copy of Advanced Organometallic Toxicology and flipped to the dog-eared chapter, page 214. The heading read, Compound 31B, progressive cytochrome oxidase inhibition via chelation pathway. She scanned the symptom timeline she had memorized years ago. At the current rate of exposure, the window was narrow. Edmund Holloway had less than 90 minutes before the compound overwhelmed his mitochondrial respiration and sent his heart into arrest. The doctors upstairs wouldn't see it coming because every early symptom mimicked simple intoxication. By the time the truth became obvious, it would be too late. She set the book down. She didn't need it. She had written the chapter from memory 100 times. Wanda returned to the ballroom with a fresh cleaning cloth and an empty tray, her camouflage. She moved toward the head table with the practiced invisibility of a woman who had spent 6 years learning how to exist without being noticed. Edmund's champagne glass sat half empty at his right hand. She waited until the conversation at the table swelled with laughter, then cleared the glass onto her tray alongside 2 used napkins. No one looked. No one cared. The janitor was doing what janitors do. She carried the glass to a small utility room behind the service corridor, locked the door, set the glass on the metal counter beneath the fluorescent light. Then, Dr. Wanda Davis went to work. She pulled a UV pen light from her keychain, a $5 tool she carried out of old habit. She held it over the champagne residue and tilted the glass. Under ultraviolet light, the liquid fluoresced with a pale greenish hue that had no business being in any champagne ever produced. Organocyanide compounds emit characteristic fluorescence under UV exposure between 365 and 395 nanometers. Wanda knew the exact wavelength. She had calibrated the instruments for this test in a laboratory that no longer remembered her name. She needed a second confirmation. From the hotel's first aid kit mounted on the wall, she took a pH test strip. She dipped it into the residue. The strip shifted to a reading that was subtly but definitively outside the normal acidity range for sparkling wine. Consistent with an alkaloid contaminant. Consistent with compound 31B. Her hands did not shake. Her breathing did not quicken. 18 years away from a laboratory, and her methodology was flawless. She wasn't finished. Back on the ballroom floor, she made a second pass near the VIP table. This time, she watched the service rotation. Edmund's champagne was not poured from the bottles circulating among other guests. It came from a separate crystal decanter, a private reserve stationed on a silver tray behind his chair, refilled by a single dedicated server. Someone had specifically prepared his drinks. This was not an accident. This was a delivery system. Wanda mapped it in her mind. The decanter, the server, the timing of refills, the progressive accumulation of the compound in Edmund's bloodstream. She calculated 3 doses over the past 2 hours based on the cyanosis progression rate. The math was clean. The conclusion was absolute. Edmund Holloway was being poisoned, deliberately, at his own gala, and the clock was running. She was standing in the utility room, evidence spread on the counter when the door opened. Ray Brooks, head of hotel security, filled the door frame. He looked at the glass, the UV light, the pH strips, and the woman in the gray uniform standing in the middle of it all. "What the hell is going on in here?" Wanda met his eyes, and for the first time tonight she did not look away. "Mr. Holloway is dying, I can prove it. And if you don't help me in the next 60 minutes, no one in this building will be able to save him." Ray stared at the champagne glass on the counter, the UV pen light, the pH strip with its damning color. He was a security man, not a scientist, but he had spent 22 years reading people, liars, thieves, drunks, con artists, and the woman standing in front of him was none of those things. Her voice carried no hysteria. Her eyes held no doubt. She spoke the way people speak when they have carried a truth so long it has become part of their skeleton. "Show me," he said. Wanda walked him through the evidence in 60 seconds. The fluorescence under UV, abnormal. The pH deviation, inconsistent with any champagne. The private decanter serving only Edmund. The symptom progression she had tracked across the evening. Flushed complexion, peripheral cyanosis, autonomic slowing. She used words Ray didn't fully understand, but the architecture of her logic was impossible to dismiss. This was not a hunch. This was a diagnosis delivered with the precision of a surgeon's blade. Ray made a decision that could end his career. He radioed his team. "Secure the VIP decanter. Quietly. Don't touch the contents. Bag it and lock it in the security office. No one is told. No one." He turned back to Wanda. "We need to get you to Dr. Foster." Wanda's jaw tightened. "She won't listen to me." "She'll listen to both of us." They found Foster near the bar, checking her phone between sips of sparkling water. Ray spoke first. Professional, direct. He explained that a member of his team had flagged a potential contamination issue with Mr. Holloway's beverages, and that the woman beside him had conducted preliminary tests suggesting a toxic compound. He chose his words carefully, framing Wanda as a resource rather than a janitor making claims. Foster looked at the pH strip. She examined the UV photographs Wanda had taken on a borrowed phone. Her skepticism cracked just slightly when Wanda described the fluorescence wavelength with a specificity that no untrained person could fabricate. "This is concerning," Foster admitted, "but organocyanide poisoning at a charity gala? That's an extraordinary accusation. I can't trigger a medical emergency based on a colorimetric test done in a utility closet. She looked at Wanda. I'll keep a closer eye on Mr. Holloway. That's the most I can do right now without more evidence. In 40 minutes, more evidence will be a body, Wanda said. Foster flinched, but she did not move. Wanda and Ray retreated to the service corridor. The clock in Wanda's head was louder now. She had presented logic, evidence, methodology, and it wasn't enough. It was never enough. Not 18 years ago when she tried to defend her research, not tonight when she tried to defend a man's life. The uniform was louder than the truth. It always had been. Then the ballroom doors burst open and Bryce Holloway came through like a storm. Someone had told him. A waiter, a staffer, a radio frequency he shouldn't have been monitoring. It didn't matter. He knew. And he was volcanic. You! He pointed at Wanda. You're still here? He turned to Ray. I gave you a direct order to remove this woman from the premises. Instead, I'm told she's running some kind of science experiment in my hotel's back rooms and telling people my father is being poisoned? His voice rose with each word. Guests near the corridor entrance turned to watch. This is insane. She's a cleaning woman. She empties garbage cans. And you're letting her play detective? Ray stood his ground. Mr. Holloway, there's evidence that warrants... Evidence? Bryce laughed. Sharp, cold, performative. Evidence from who? From her? He jabbed his finger toward Wanda. Look at her. She doesn't have a degree. She doesn't have a career. She has a mop and a name tag. That's it. That's all she is. And you want me to stop a $200 million fundraiser because the help thinks she can read a champagne glass better than 3 board-certified physicians in my ballroom? 2 guests had their phones raised now. A donor couple leaned in, entertained. A waiter froze mid-step, tray in hand, afraid to move. Bryce lowered his voice, but the venom only concentrated. I'm going to say this once. Get this woman out of my building. If she's still on the property in 5 minutes, I'm calling the police. And you, he looked at Ray, you can explain to your next employer why you took orders from a janitor instead of the man who signs your paychecks. Ray didn't move. Wanda didn't move. The silence between them stretched like a wire about to snap. Then a sound cut through the tension. A crash from the ballroom. Crystals shattering on marble. A woman screamed. Then another. Voices piled on top of each other in a wave of panic that rolled through the kitchen doors like thunder. Ray's radio exploded with noise. Security to the head table! Mr. Holloway is down! Mr. Holloway is on the floor! We need medical care now! Bryce's face went white. Every drop of arrogance drained from his expression in a single heartbeat. He turned and ran toward the ballroom without another word. Ray looked at Wanda. She was already moving. Through the kitchen, through the swinging doors, into the ballroom where 400 guests were on their feet, pressing toward the head table where Edmund Holloway lay crumpled on the marble floor. His champagne glass had shattered beside him. His face was gray, his lips were blue. His chest rose and fell in shallow, desperate gasps, the breathing pattern of a body losing its war against a poison that no one in the room had believed existed 5 minutes ago. Dr. Foster was on her knees beside him, fingers on his wrist, stethoscope pressed to his chest. She shouted for someone to call 911. She barked orders for the first aid kit. She was doing everything a competent doctor should do, and none of it would work. Because Foster was treating a cardiac event. She was following the protocol for a man whose heart was failing. But Edmund Holloway's heart was not failing. It was being suffocated at the cellular level by a compound that blocked the very mechanism his cells used to breathe. Standard cardiac intervention would stabilize nothing. It would buy minutes at best, and then those minutes would run out. Wanda pushed through the crowd. A guest shoved her shoulder. Get back, let the doctors work. Another blocked her path.
Someone get the janitor out of here.
But Wanda kept walking, straight toward the man on the floor, straight toward the truth she had been carrying all night, the truth that every person in this room had refused to hear. And now, finally, they had no choice. The crowd parted, not out of respect, but out of confusion. Why was the janitor walking toward the dying man? 2 guests reached to stop her. Ray stepped between them and held up his hand. "Let her through." Wanda knelt beside Edmund. Her eyes moved across his body with the speed and discipline of a clinician who had run this assessment 1,000 times. Nail beds, deep blue. Lips, cyanotic. Pupils, sluggish. Breathing, 12 per minute and dropping. Skin, cold, clammy, ashen beneath the chandelier light. She pressed 2 fingers to his carotid. His pulse was thready, irregular, fading. She looked up at Foster. "What are you giving him?" Foster blinked. No janitor in the history of her career had ever asked her that question in that tone. "Aspirin, nitroglycerin, standard ACS protocol. I've called for a defibrillator." "Stop." Wanda's voice was not loud, but it cut the air like a scalpel. "This is not acute coronary syndrome. Aspirin won't help. Nitroglycerin will accelerate vasodilation and speed the compound through his system faster. You are making it worse." Foster stared at her. The ballroom was silent. 400 people holding their breath, watching a woman in a gray uniform contradict a licensed physician over a dying billionaire's body. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Foster whispered. Wanda reached beneath her collar. She pulled the thin silver chain over her head and held the pendant in her open palm. The miniature Erlenmeyer flask, catching the chandelier light the way it had never been allowed to before. She held it for 1 breath. 2. Then she spoke. "My name is Dr. Wanda Davis. I hold a doctorate in biomedical toxicology from the Caldwell Institute of Biomedical Sciences. I am the original author of the classification system for compound class cyanide derivatives, the system the medical community calls the Ashton Toxicological Framework." She paused. "It is not Dr. Ashton's work. It is mine. Every page, every formula, every conclusion. It was stolen from me 18 years ago by a man who is sitting in this room right now." The silence that followed was so complete that the only sound was Edmund's labored breathing and the distant wail of an approaching ambulance. 400 heads turned. Eyes searched. And then, one by one, they found him. Dr. Gregory Ashton stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, champagne glass still in his hand. The color had left his face entirely. His mouth opened, but no sound came. For 18 years, he had lived inside a lie so comfortable he had forgotten it was a lie. Now the lie was standing 10 feet away from him, kneeling over a dying man, wearing a janitor's uniform and speaking with an authority that made his Whitfield Prize feel like a toy. Ashton tried. This is absurd. That woman was removed from Caldwell for research misconduct. She fabricated data. She's delusional." Wanda did not raise her voice. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Edmund's fading pulse and spoke as though she were reading from the paper she had written with her own hands. "Compound 31B. Delayed organocyanide toxicity through progressive inhibition of cytochrome C oxidase via a chelation pathway. Published in the Journal of Toxicological Sciences, Volume 44, Issue 3, page 312. Methodology: in vivo murine model, dosage titration across 14-day exposure windows, spectrophotometric confirmation at 540 nanometers." She paused. "Shall I continue, Dr. Ashton? Because I can recite every sentence. I wrote them at a desk you later claimed as your own." Ashton said nothing. His glass trembled. His silence was louder than any confession. Bryce stood 5 feet away, mouth open, the word janitor still hanging somewhere in his throat but suddenly meaningless. Foster looked at Wanda, truly looked, for the first time all night. The terminology, the precision, the calm, absolute certainty of a woman who had been right from the beginning and had been punished for it by everyone in this room and beyond. "Dr. Davis," Foster's voice cracked on the name. "What do you need?" 3 words. Dr. Davis, spoken aloud in a room full of people who had only seen a mop and a uniform and dark skin and had decided that was enough to know everything about her. It was the first time in 18 years that anyone had called Wanda by the title she had earned with her mind, her years, and her brilliance. Her eyes glistened for half a second. Then she locked in. Hydroxycobalamin, intravenous, high dose, now, and clear this space. I need room and light. Foster's hands moved fast. She pulled the first aid kit open, laid out what she had. Gauze, saline, a basic IV line, epinephrine, oxygen mask. Standard emergency supplies. Nothing designed for what was killing Edmund Holloway. I don't carry hydroxycobalamin, Foster said. It's not standard for event medical kits. The nearest hospital is 22 minutes by ambulance. 22 minutes. Edmund didn't have 22 minutes. His oxygen saturation read 81% on the portable pulse oximeter Foster had clipped to his finger. Below 90 was dangerous. Below 80 was organ failure. The number was still falling. Wanda didn't panic. Panic was a luxury for people who hadn't spent a decade training their minds to function inside a crisis. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds, not to pray, but to search. Somewhere in the architecture of her memory, behind 18 years of mopping and scrubbing and being invisible, the researcher was still alive. And she was thinking. Hydroxycobalamin is a form of vitamin B12. It works by binding to cyanide ions in the bloodstream, converting them to cyanocobalamin, which the kidneys can excrete. If she couldn't get hydroxycobalamin, she needed the closest pharmacological relative available within this building. Right now. Her eyes opened. Does this hotel accommodate guests with pernicious anemia? Foster frowned. What? Pernicious anemia. B12 deficiency. Some luxury hotels stock injectable cyanocobalamin for VIP guests with the condition. It's a concierge medical service. Does the Holloway Grand offer it? Foster turned to Ray. Ray was already on his radio. 30 seconds later, the answer came back from the executive chef. Yes. The hotel kitchen maintained a supply of injectable cyanocobalamin in a pharmaceutical-grade refrigerator for a long-term VIP resident on the 14th floor who required weekly B12 injections. Get it, Wanda said. All of it, now! Ray dispatched a security officer at a sprint. The man crossed the ballroom, through the kitchen, into the service elevator. 90 seconds later, he returned carrying a small medical cooler. Inside, 4 vials of cyanocobalamin, 1,000 micrograms per milliliter, sealed and refrigerated. Wanda examined each vial, checked the expiration dates, checked the concentration, calculated the dosage in her head. Body weight estimation for a 64-year-old male, approximately 85 kilograms, adjusting for the severity of cyanide exposure based on the cyanosis progression rate she had tracked over the past 2 hours. The math ran through her mind the way music runs through a concert pianist's fingers, automatic, precise, and beautiful in its certainty. I need the IV line, saline drip, slow push, not bolus, and someone elevate his legs, 12 inches. Foster set the IV, Wanda prepared the injection. The ballroom was a cathedral of silence. 400 guests stood in a ring around the marble floor where a billionaire lay dying, and a janitor held the syringe. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman was crying softly. Somewhere else, a phone screen glowed, still recording. Then Bryce stepped forward. He moved through the crowd like a man walking through water, slow, heavy, his face carved from white stone. He planted himself between Wanda and his father's body. His hand closed around her wrist. "No!" His voice was hoarse. "You are not putting anything into my father. I don't care what you say you are. I don't care what letters you claim to have after your name. You are a janitor in my hotel, and I will not let you kill my father with whatever is in that needle." His grip was tight. His eyes were wet, not with compassion, but with the terror of a man who had built his entire identity on control and was watching it disintegrate. Wanda looked down at his hand on her wrist. Then she raised her eyes to meet his. She did not pull away. She did not flinch. She spoke with the calm of a woman who had already lost everything and therefore had nothing left to fear. Your father's oxygen is at 79%. In 10 minutes, his organs will begin to shut down. At 15, his brain will start to die. You can destroy me tomorrow, fire me, blacklist me, drag my name through every court in this city. But if you stop me right now, you will not have a father to defend." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Bryce's grip loosened, not because he believed her, but because the truth in her voice was heavier than his rage. Ray stepped forward and placed his hand firmly over Bryce's. "Let go, Mr. Holloway." It was not a request. Bryce's fingers opened. He staggered backward. Foster caught his arm and moved him aside. The path was clear. Wanda knelt on the cold marble floor. Chandelier light poured down on her from above, catching the silver pendant still hanging from her hand. The Erlenmeyer flask, swinging gently like a tiny pendulum counting the seconds Edmund had left. Around her, a circle of tuxedos and gowns and diamonds pressed close, watching with the desperate attention of people who had realized, too late, that the most important person in the room was the one they had tried to throw out. She took Edmund's arm, turned it, found the antecubital vein on the first attempt. 18 years away from a laboratory, and her hands remembered the anatomy like a language learned in childhood that never truly fades. She connected the IV line, drew the cyanocobalamin into the syringe, measured, double-checked, then pushed the plunger with a slow, controlled pressure that betrayed not a single tremor. The liquid entered his bloodstream. Wanda adjusted the saline drip. She positioned Edmund's head to open his airway, chin tilted, jaw forward. She elevated his legs with folded tablecloths. She placed the oxygen mask over his mouth and calibrated the flow rate. Every movement was deliberate, methodical, and performed with the quiet authority of someone who had done this 1,000 times in her mind during 18 years of exile. Then she waited. 1 minute. Edmund's pulse oximeter read 78. No change. Bryce was pacing behind the crowd, his hands pulling at his hair. Foster monitored the IV with trembling fingers. A guest near the back was praying audibly. 2 minutes. 78. Still no change. The ambulance siren was growing louder somewhere outside, but it sounded impossibly far. Wanda watched Edmund's fingernails, the same detail she had noticed hours ago when she was just a woman with a mop who saw what no one else bothered to see. 3 minutes, 79. She did not blink. 4 minutes, 80. Wanda exhaled, a slow, controlled breath that she had been holding in her chest without realizing it. The number was climbing, the chelation was working, the compound was being bound, neutralized, pulled from the receptors on Edmund's mitochondria, one molecule at a time. 5 minutes, 83. The bluish tint in his nail beds began to soften. Color, real, living color, crept back into his fingertips like dawn pushing through the edge of a long night. 6 minutes, 85. His breathing deepened. His chest rose and fell with rhythm instead of desperation. 7 minutes, 88. Foster pressed her stethoscope to his chest and looked up at Wanda with an expression that contained no skepticism, no condescension, no doubt, only awe. 8 minutes. Edmund Holloway's eyes opened. He blinked against the chandelier light. His gaze was unfocused, drifting, the gaze of a man swimming back to the surface of consciousness from a very deep and very dark place. His eyes moved across the faces above him, strangers all of them, in their tuxedos and gowns. Then his gaze found the one face that was different. The woman was kneeling beside him in a gray uniform with a name tag that read only Wanda. The woman whose cracked hands held an IV line and whose dark eyes held 18 years of silence. "Who are you?" he whispered. Wanda looked down at him, at the man whose floors she had mopped for 6 years, at the life she had just pulled back from the edge of a death that no one else in this glittering room had the knowledge to prevent. She answered simply, without pride, without bitterness, without performance. "I'm the woman who cleaned your floors, and I'm the woman who just saved your life." The paramedics burst through the ballroom doors 30 seconds later. The lead EMT took over, reviewed the IV, checked vitals, examined the treatment log Wanda had dictated to Foster during the procedure. He looked up from his clipboard. Whoever administered this protocol knew exactly what they were doing. 5 more minutes without intervention, and we'd be performing a post-mortem, not a rescue. He looked around the circle of billionaires, surgeons, and socialites. Who did this? Foster pointed to the woman standing alone by her mop cart at the edge of the crowd, the silver pendant resting against the gray fabric of her uniform. The janitor, the one they had called trash, the one they had filmed, laughed at, shoved aside, the one whose name they never asked and whose voice they refused to hear. She had saved the most powerful man in the room, and she had done it with the very knowledge that the world had stolen from her and handed to someone else. The ambulance carried Edmund Holloway to Mount Sinai with sirens cutting through the Manhattan night. Wanda rode in the back, not because anyone invited her, but because the lead paramedic refused to let her leave. "You stabilized him. You're coming." Foster rode alongside, monitoring vitals she now understood only because the janitor had explained them. She did not speak for the entire ride. There was nothing she could say that wouldn't sound like an apology arriving 18 years too late. At the hospital, the toxicology team confirmed everything. Compound 31B, organocyanide poisoning, delivered through Edmund's private champagne decanter over 3 hours in carefully measured doses designed to mimic intoxication before triggering fatal cardiac arrest. The diagnosis matched, down to the molecular pathway, the classification system published under Gregory Ashton's name. Wanda's system. Wanda's work. Edmund was stabilized by midnight. His oxygen returned to 97%. His color returned. His mind cleared. The doctors told him he had been 4 minutes from irreversible brain damage when Dr. Davis pushed the first syringe. At 2 in the morning, Edmund asked to see her. Wanda sat beside his bed in the ICU, still wearing the gray uniform. The name tag still read Wanda, but the man in the hospital bed looked at her the way no one had in 18 years, as though she were real. "They told me everything," Edmund said, his voice rough. "What you saw, what you knew, what they did to you." He took her hand, cracked, chemical-stained, in his trembling palm. "I owe you my life, Dr. Davis, and I intend to pay that debt." Wanda held his hand. She did not cry, but for the first time in 18 years, she did not feel invisible. Somewhere back at the Holloway Grand, Bryce sat alone in the empty ballroom, surrounded by overturned chairs and shattered crystal, staring at a phone ringing with calls he was too afraid to answer. The story broke before sunrise. A guest's recording from the ballroom, shaky, vertical, raw, hit social media at 4:47 a.m. The video showed everything. Bryce calling Wanda trash, guests laughing, phones filming, and then the same woman kneeling on marble in a janitor's uniform, pushing a syringe into a billionaire's arm while 400 people watched in stunned silence. By noon, the clip had 14 million views. By evening, it had 42 million. The hashtag Justice for Wanda trended in 11 countries. The journalists came next. Investigators pulled Caldwell Institute records, email correspondence, time-stamped drafts, laboratory notebooks, peer review submissions. Every document told the same story. In 2008, Wanda Davis had completed a landmark study on organocyanide toxicity syndromes. She had submitted her manuscript to the Journal of Toxicological Sciences. Her colleague, Dr. Gregory Ashton, had accessed her unpublished data through a shared university server, rewritten the introduction, and submitted the paper under his own name 3 weeks before Wanda's submission was processed. When Wanda protested, Ashton accused her of fabricating results. The Institute convened a review board. Ashton had allies. Wanda had evidence. But evidence means nothing when the people judging it have already decided who deserves to be believed. Wanda was stripped of her credentials. Her name was erased from every publication. Ashton received the Whitfield Prize in Toxicology the following year for her work, her methodology, her discovery. He built an entire career on a foundation that belonged to a woman he had buried alive. Now the ground was giving her back. The Whitfield Prize Committee opened a formal review within 72 hours. The Caldwell Institute launched an independent ethics investigation. Scientific journals began issuing corrections, removing Ashton's name, restoring Wanda's. One by one, the pillars of Ashton's reputation crumbled like plaster over rotten wood. Dr. Gregory Ashton held a press conference on the fourth day. He stood behind a podium with trembling hands and a prepared statement. He denied everything. He called Wanda a disgruntled former colleague. He cited his decades of contributions to the field. But the reporters had the timestamps. They had the lab notebooks. They had Wanda's handwriting on drafts dated months before Ashton's submission. He left the podium without taking questions, climbed into a black car, and was not seen publicly again. The Whitfield Prize was formally rescinded on day 12. On day 19, it was awarded to its rightful owner, Dr. Wanda Davis. Bryce Holloway's reckoning arrived quietly. He attempted to control the narrative, issuing a statement claiming the hotel's medical team had managed the crisis efficiently. But Ray's security footage told the full truth. Bryce blocking the corridor, grabbing Wanda's wrist, threatening to have her arrested while his father lay dying. Edmund watched the footage from his hospital bed. He said nothing for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and made one call. Bryce was removed from the Foundation's leadership that afternoon. Edmund kept his promise. Within 6 weeks, he personally funded the establishment of the Davis Institute for Toxicological Research, an independent laboratory with Wanda as its founding director. Full resources, full autonomy, a research team of her choosing. The Caldwell Institute issued a formal public apology, and Wanda's name was restored to all original publications. The criminal investigation into Edmund's poisoning led to a former business rival who had orchestrated the assassination through a compromised catering employee. Both were arrested. Edmund recovered fully, and on the day the Davis Institute opened its doors, Wanda stood in the lobby wearing a white lab coat for the first time in 18 years. The Erlenmeyer flask pendant rested above the coat, visible, unhidden. Behind her on the wall hung a framed photograph, her original research team at Caldwell, 2008. She stood in the center, young, brilliant, unbroken. Beside the photograph, a plaque read, "For every voice that was silenced, for every truth that survived." Wanda Davis mopped floors for 6 years. She cleaned toilets, emptied trash cans, and scrubbed stains left behind by people who never learned her last name. She did it silently, without complaint, without bitterness, because survival does not wait for justice, and dignity does not require an audience. But she never stopped being a scientist, not for one day, not for 1 hour. The knowledge lived inside her the way a heartbeat lives inside a chest, constant, quiet, waiting. The world told her she was nothing, a janitor, a uniform, a dark-skinned woman with a mop who had no business speaking in rooms where powerful people gathered. They laughed at her. They filmed her humiliation. They turned away when she needed one single person to listen. And then the moment came, the moment it always comes, when the truth could no longer be ignored. When every degree, every title, every tailored suit in that ballroom meant nothing, and the only thing that mattered was knowledge, real knowledge, the kind that cannot be stolen, cannot be silenced, and cannot be erased, no matter how hard the world tries. The most dangerous prejudice is not hatred. It is an assumption. The assumption that the janitor cannot be the doctor. The assumption that the uniform is the person. The assumption that you already know everything about someone based on what they look like, what they wear, or where they stand in the room. Wanda Davis proved that knowledge does not expire, that dignity does not diminish, and that truth, no matter how long it is buried, always finds its way back to the surface. If her story moved you, if it made you think about someone you may have overlooked, if it reminded you that extraordinary people are often standing right beside us in silence, then do something right now.